Knox was an elite Navy SEAL built for war, but completely broken by it. Suffering from severe trauma, the military deemed him unfit for duty and reassigned him to clean dog cages. There he met Valor, a massive German shepherd who was also cast aside. Valor was deemed a failure because of his crippling fear of loud noises. They were two broken souls trapped in the same dark system. But when the military decided Valor was a useless liability and ordered him to be put down, Knox made a choice that would destroy his entire career. He went AWOL, stealing the dog and fleeing deep into the unforgiving wilderness. He thought he was just saving the dog's life. He had absolutely no idea that in the heart of a deadly mountain storm, this terrified animal was about to save his. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from, and if you love stories that touch the heart, please subscribe to support our channel. Knox woke up gasping for air. His hands gripped the damp bedsheets with crushing force. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The ceiling fan spun slowly above him, casting moving shadows across the bare walls of his small room in San Diego. He sat up and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. He looked at the digital clock on the nightstand. It flashed the early morning hour. Another night, another nightmare. The deafening sounds of gunfire and desperate shouting still echoed loudly in his mind. Knox was an active-duty Navy SEAL. He stood tall with broad shoulders and a body built strictly for war. A thick, jagged scar ran down his left forearm. His dark eyes held a deep, heavy weariness that sleep could never fix. He pushed himself out of the tangled bed and walked slowly to the small bathroom. He turned on the cold water tap and splashed the freezing water over his face and neck. He looked at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized the hollow man looking back at him. The recent covert mission had taken a severe physical and mental toll on him. He lost good men in the field. He lost a vital piece of his own soul in the desert sand. Later that morning, Knox stood at perfect attention inside a brightly lit office at the naval base. Commander Harlan sat behind a large, polished wooden desk. Harlan was a man in his later years. He had neat silver hair and a stern, weathered face that rarely showed any trace of emotion. He held a thick medical folder in his hands. He read the pages in silence. "At ease, Knox," Harlan said. He set the heavy folder down on the desk. Knox relaxed his stiff stance slightly. "Thank you, sir." Harlan sighed heavily and leaned back in his leather chair. "The medical board submitted their final evaluation this morning. Your physical wounds are healing fine. You are strong. But the psychological assessment tells a very different story. They report severe post-traumatic stress. You're experiencing spontaneous panic attacks and chronic insomnia." Knox clenched his jaw tightly. "With all due respect, sir, I am completely fit to deploy. I just need more time in the gym to clear my head." "This is not about physical strength," Harlan replied sharply. "You froze during the last live fire simulation. You dropped your weapon. You cannot protect your team if you cannot control your own mind under pressure. The medical board determined you are currently unfit for active field duty." The words hit Knox like a physical punch to the gut. Field duty was his entire life. He knew absolutely nothing else. "Are you discharging me, sir?" "No," Harlan said calmly. "You have an excellent service record. We are not kicking you out of the Navy, but we must reassign you to a low-stress environment until you are fully cleared by the base psychiatrists. Effective immediately, you will report to the K9 Support Division. You will assist with kennel maintenance and basic animal care." Knox stared at the commander in disbelief. "You want me to clean dog cages, sir?" "I want you to follow orders," Harlan said. His voice became cold and left no room for further argument. "Report to Sergeant Baker at the K9 facility by the morning hour. Dismissed." "Yes, sir," Knox said. He saluted crisply, turned on his heel, and walked out of the office. Anger and deep frustration boiled violently inside him. He felt completely useless. The K9 support facility was located on the far east side of the base near the airstrip. It was a long, gray concrete building, filled with the constant sounds of barking dogs and clanking metal doors. Knox walked through the main entrance and quickly found Sergeant Baker. Baker was a short, stocky man with a receding hairline and a clipboard tucked under his arm. He wore faded blue coveralls. "You must be the new guy," Baker said. He looked Knox up and down with a skeptical eye. "A top-tier SEAL doing basic kennel duty. That is certainly a first." "Just tell me what to do," Knox said flatly. He wanted to get to work and stop talking. Baker handed him a thick pair of yellow rubber gloves and a heavy waterproof apron. "Grab a high-pressure hose and a stiff scrub brush from the supply closet. Start with Block C. Clean the empty runs. Refill all the water buckets. And do not bother the active duty dogs. They are highly trained to work, not to play with you." Knox put on the apron and grabbed the necessary cleaning supplies. He walked down the long, dimly lit corridor of Block C. The strong smell of chemical bleach and wet dog fur filled the air. He turned on the hose and began scrubbing the concrete floors aggressively. The physical labor was entirely mindless. It gave his brain too much time to think. The terrifying memories of the failed mission crept slowly back into his mind. He scrubbed the floor harder, trying desperately to erase the vivid images of his fallen teammates from his memory. Hours passed in silence. Knox moved methodically from one empty cage to the next. His muscles burned from the repetitive motion, but he welcomed the physical pain. It was vastly better than the emotional numbness he felt constantly inside. Suddenly, a loud, piercing siren echoed loudly through the entire military base. It was a routine weekly emergency drill. The high-pitched wail vibrated intensely through the concrete walls of the kennel. Knox immediately dropped his scrub brush and covered his ears tightly. His breathing quickened in an instant. The sudden loud noise triggered an immediate visceral reaction in his brain. It sounded exactly like the incoming artillery warning from his disastrous last deployment. He closed his eyes tight and forced himself to take slow, deep breaths. He counted backward from 10 in his head. Slowly, his racing heart rate settled down. He opened his eyes and wiped his sweaty palms on his apron. As the deafening siren continued to wail outside, a new sound cut sharply through the mechanical noise. It was a frantic, terrifying sound of pure distress. Knox walked cautiously toward the far end of the kennel block. The disturbing sounds grew much louder. It was a chaotic mix of panicked barking, high-pitched whining, and the violent scraping of metal against metal. He stopped abruptly in front of the very last cage in the darkest corner of the room. Inside the small cage was a massive German Shepherd. The dog had a beautiful, thick, dark coat, but right now it was a picture of pure, uncontrollable terror. The large animal threw itself repeatedly against the solid iron bars of the cage door. The dog whined loudly, trying desperately to escape the invisible threat of the loud siren. Knox watched the scene in complete shock. The German Shepherd clawed frantically at the steel mesh with all its might. Fresh blood smeared heavily across the cold metal. The dog was literally tearing its own front paws apart in a blind, frantic panic. "Hey!" Knox said loudly. He stepped much closer to the cage. "Hey, stop it! You're hurting yourself!" The dog did not hear him at all. The blaring siren completely consumed the animal's mind. The German Shepherd spun around rapidly and bit hard at the iron bars, chipping a tooth in the process. Knox recognized that wild, desperate look immediately. It was the exact same blind panic he felt when the dark nightmares took over his own mind every single night. He dropped his heavy rubber gloves onto the wet floor. He did not care about Baker's strict rules or the potential danger of an aggressive dog. He saw a broken creature drowning helplessly in its own traumatized mind. Knox reached out, unlocked the heavy steel latch, and pulled the cage door wide open. Knox sat alone in the cramped break room of the K9 facility. The room smelled of old coffee and wet boots. A single fluorescent bulb flickered above him. He held a thick manila folder in his hands. The name Valor was stamped on the cover in bold black letters. Knox opened the file and began to read. Valor was a purebred German Shepherd. His early training scores were flawless. The file praised his bite inhibition, his tracking speed, and his raw intelligence. But the last 3 pages painted a different picture. Red ink marked the final evaluations. Severe noise phobia, unpredictable under fire, failed field simulation. The commanding officer had written a final note at the bottom. Unfit for service, Recommend transfer to civilian animal control. Knox closed the folder and tossed it onto the plastic table. The words echoed in his mind. Unfit for service. It was the exact same label the medical board had stamped on him. They were both top performers broken by the job. The military had a simple process for broken tools. They threw them away. Knox clenched his fists. He felt a bitter connection to the dog locked in the dark corner of Block C. The following days blurred together in a routine of heavy labor. Knox scrubbed concrete floors until his hands blistered. He hauled heavy bags of dry dog food from the loading dock to the storage room. Sergeant Baker watched him closely, waiting for the Navy SEAL to complain. Knox never said a word. He focused entirely on the work, but his mind always drifted back to Valor. The large German shepherd refused to leave his cage. Other handlers tried to coax him out with treats and high-pitched voices. Valor ignored them all. He stayed curled in the tightest corner of his enclosure. His dark eyes watched every movement with intense suspicion. He refused to eat the dry kibble the staff pushed through the food slot. One afternoon, Knox walked up to Valor's cage. He held a metal bowl filled with fresh chicken and rice. He did not speak. He did not make sudden movements. He slowly slid the bowl through the slot. Valor lifted his head slightly. The dog sniffed the air but did not move closer. Knox sat down on the wet concrete floor outside the cage. He crossed his legs and leaned against the opposite wall. He simply waited. Several minutes passed. Valor slowly stood up. He kept his body low to the ground. He crept toward the bowl, grabbed a mouthful of chicken, and immediately retreated to his dark corner. "He only eats when it is quiet," a voice said. Knox looked up. A young woman stood at the end of the hall. She wore the standard blue coveralls. "I am Elena," she said. "Veterinary technician." Elena was short and energetic with her brown hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She carried a clipboard and a box of medical supplies. "He is terrified of us," Elena continued. She walked over and looked at Valor. "The handlers used shock collars to fix his noise sensitivity. It backfired. Now he associates every loud noise with physical pain. The system ruined him. They are sending him to animal control," Knox said flatly. Elena looked down sadly. "I know. Animal control will not adopt out a military dog with a bite history and severe anxiety. They will put him down. It is a waste." Knox looked back at the cage. Valor was staring right back at him. "Yes, it is." One stormy night brought a massive storm to the coast of San Diego. Knox volunteered for the night watch. He preferred the isolation. He sat at the front desk, staring at the security monitors. The wind howled violently outside. Heavy rain lashed against the small windows of the facility. The old building groaned under the pressure of the storm. Knox felt his chest tighten. The sound of the wind reminded him of the helicopter rotors in the desert. He tapped his fingers on the desk, trying to stay grounded. He focused on the steady breathing technique his therapist had taught him. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning lit up the entire room. A split second later, a deafening crack of thunder shook the concrete floor. The sound was explosive. It hit like an artillery shell. Instantly, the kennel erupted into chaos. Dozens of dogs started barking frantically. But underneath the chorus of barks, Knox heard a terrifying sound. It was the sound of tearing metal and panicked yelping coming from Block C. Knox jumped out of his chair and sprinted down the hallway. He grabbed his heavy flashlight and shined it down the corridor. He reached the end of the block and stopped. Valor had completely lost his mind. The thunder had pushed him over the edge. The massive dog was throwing his entire body weight against the cage door. The metal latch, already weakened from his previous panic attacks, was bending outward. Valor bit the wire mesh, pulling it back with raw, desperate strength. Another crack of thunder exploded overhead. Valor let out a piercing scream. He hit the door with incredible force. The latch snapped off completely. The heavy steel door swung open. Valor tumbled out onto the wet concrete floor. The dog scrambled to his feet. He had no idea where he was. He was blind with terror. He spun in a circle, slipping on the wet floor, and bolted straight toward Knox. Knox did not step back. He did not reach for a catch pole. He dropped his flashlight. As Valor crashed into him, Knox fell to his knees and wrapped both arms tightly around the thick neck of the German Shepherd. The dog thrashed violently. Valor weighed over 90 pounds of pure muscle. He kicked and scratched, trying to break free from the hold. His sharp claws tore through Knox's thin uniform shirt, ripping into the skin of his chest and arms. "Hold still!" Knox commanded, raising his voice over the storm. Valor snapped his jaws, his teeth clicking inches from Knox's face. The dog was completely consumed by the flight response. Knox tightened his grip. He pulled the struggling animal closer to his chest, pinning Valor's head against his shoulder. He closed his eyes and buried his face in the dog's wet fur. "I have you," Knox said. His voice was lower now, firm and steady. "I have you. You are safe." The thunder roared again. Valor flinched violently, letting out a pitiful whimper. Knox did not let go. He pressed his hand firmly against the side of Valor's chest. Through the thick fur and muscle, Knox felt the dog's heart. It was beating at a terrifying speed. It hammered against the ribs in a frantic, irregular rhythm. In that exact moment, Knox felt a strange sensation in his own chest. His own heart was racing at the exact same speed. The wild, chaotic thumping matched perfectly. The cold sweat, the uncontrollable shaking, the desperate need to escape. Knox recognized every single symptom. He was holding a mirror. Knox stopped fighting the dog. Instead, he simply held him. He began taking slow, exaggerated breaths. He expanded his chest deeply, forcing the dog to feel the slow rhythm of his breathing. "Breathe," Knox whispered into Valor's ear. He repeated the motion. Inhale deeply. Exhale slowly. Minutes dragged on. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the dark hallway, the violent struggle began to slow down. Valor stopped thrashing. His heavy panting started to synchronize with Knox's steady breathing. The dog's tense muscles slowly relaxed. Finally, Valor dropped his head heavily onto Knox's shoulder. He let out a long, exhausted sigh. They sat together on the cold, wet floor in the dark. A broken soldier and a broken dog holding on to each other to survive the storm. Knox knew right then that he could not let the military destroy this animal. He had to do something. Knox stood outside Commander Harlan's office the very next morning. His uniform was clean, but the scratches on his neck from the storm were highly visible. He knocked twice and entered. Harlan looked up from his computer screen. "Sir, I want to submit a formal request," Knox said. "I want to foster the German Shepherd, Valor." Harlan frowned and leaned back. "That dog is scheduled for transfer to civilian animal control next week. He is a liability." "He is traumatized, sir," Knox corrected him firmly. "The standard kennel environment makes him worse. He needs quiet. He needs a single handler. I live alone near the coast. My house is completely fenced and isolated. Let me take him." Harlan tapped his pen on the desk. "You are not a certified K9 trainer, Knox. You are on medical leave for psychological instability, which means I have the time," Knox replied. "I know what he is going through. Give me 30 days. Let me try to rehabilitate him." Harlan stared at Knox for a long time. He saw a stubborn determination in the SEAL's eyes that had been missing for months. "Fine," Harlan said finally. "You have 30 days as a temporary foster. If he bites anyone or causes any public disturbance, the local police will take him and you will face disciplinary action. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Knox said. Knox signed the release papers that afternoon. Getting Valor into the truck was a massive challenge. The dog planted his feet and refused to move. Knox did not pull the leash. He sat on the tailgate of his truck and threw small pieces of hot dog into the back. It took some time, but Valor finally jumped in. Knox's house was a small, weathered cabin located just a few miles from the rocky coastline. It sat at the end of a long, dirt road. There were no close neighbors. The salty ocean breeze blew constantly through the open windows. When they arrived, Knox opened the truck door. Valor jumped out and immediately sprinted toward the front porch. He found a dark spot underneath a wooden bench and curled into a tight ball. "Take your time," Knox said. He unlocked the front door and left it wide open. He went inside and started cooking dinner. He made sure to keep his movements slow and deliberate. He avoided dropping pots or slamming cabinet doors. A couple of hours later, Valor slowly crept inside the house. His belly almost touched the wooden floor. He found the darkest corner of the living room right behind a large armchair and settled there. That became his safe zone. The initial week was incredibly difficult. Valor reacted to everything. When the refrigerator compressor clicked on, the dog flinched violently. When a distant garbage truck drove down the main highway, Valor paced the room nervously, panting heavily. Knox adapted his entire life to fit the dog's needs. He stopped watching television. He stopped listening to loud music. He moved through his own house like a ghost. He established a strict, quiet routine. Every morning at the usual hour, he placed a bowl of food near the armchair and walked away. He never forced eye contact. He never reached out to pet the dog. During the day, Knox sat on the floor across the room. He read books or cleaned his gear. He kept a pouch of high-value treats on his belt. Every time Valor looked at him without growling, Knox tossed a piece of meat across the floor. Slowly, the distance between them began to shrink. Gradually, Valor moved from behind the armchair to the edge of the living room rug. Over time, the dog started following Knox into the kitchen, keeping a safe distance. But while the dog slowly improved, Knox's own mind continued to wage a brutal war. The nightmares did not stop. They simply changed shape. One night, Knox woke up screaming. The memory of the desert ambush played vividly behind his closed eyelids. He felt the intense heat of the sun. He heard the sharp crack of sniper fire. He saw his team leader fall to the dirt. Knox scrambled out of bed. His chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He stumbled out of his bedroom and walked into the dark living room. He did not turn on the lights. He slid down the wall until he hit the floor. He pulled his knees tightly to his chest and buried his face in his hands. The heavy weight of survivor's guilt crushed him entirely. He survived when better men died. He felt utterly worthless. He sat there in the dark, trembling uncontrollably, completely lost in the dark abyss of his own mind. He did not realize how loud he was breathing. A soft sound broke through the silence. Knox slowly lifted his head. He looked across the dark room. Valor was standing near the hallway. The large German shepherd was watching him closely. The dog's ears were pinned back, but he did not look terrified. He looked curious. Knox watched as Valor turned his head and picked up an old chewed-up tennis ball from the floor. The dog held the yellow ball in his mouth. He took one step forward, then another. Knox held his breath. He did not move a single muscle. Valor crossed the living room. The dog approached the broken soldier sitting on the floor. Valor stopped inches away from Knox's boots. The dog lowered his head and gently dropped the tennis ball directly onto Knox's foot. The ball rolled off and hit the floor with a soft thud. Knox looked at the ball, then looked up at the dog. Valor took one final step forward. He let out a deep, long breath. Then the massive German shepherd lowered his head and rested his heavy, warm chin gently on top of Knox's knee. A sudden wave of emotion hit Knox hard. A thick lump formed in his throat. He slowly raised his right hand. His hand shook slightly as he reached out. He placed his palm flat against the side of Valor's neck. The dog's fur was thick and coarse. Valor did not flinch. He did not pull away. He simply leaned his weight against Knox's leg. Knox closed his eyes. The terrifying sounds of the desert ambush slowly faded away. The racing beat of his heart began to slow down. He sat on the floor petting the quiet dog and realized they were exactly what the other needed. They were healing together. Knox woke up to the sound of his phone ringing. It was the usual morning hour. The sun barely peeked over the ocean horizon. He looked at the caller ID. Base command. He answered it quickly. Sergeant Baker was on the other end. He told Knox to report to Commander Harlan's office at the morning hour. It was not a request. Knox hung up the phone. He looked at the foot of his bed. Valor was sleeping soundly there. This was a new development. The German shepherd had moved from the living room floor to Knox's bedroom a couple of nights ago, It was a massive step forward. Knox got dressed in his uniform. He filled Valor's bowl with food. He patted the dog lightly on the head and left the house. Knox arrived at the naval base exactly on time. He walked into the administrative building. He knocked on the heavy wooden door of Commander Harlan's office. He entered and stood at attention. Harlan was not alone. A tall, thin man with sharp facial features and thin wire glasses sat in the corner chair. The man wore a perfectly pressed khaki uniform. "At ease, Knox," Harlan said. "This is Captain Prescott from Logistics and Budget Oversight." Knox nodded at the captain. "Sir." Captain Prescott did not smile. He opened a thick black folder on his lap. "I will get straight to the point, Knox. The military is implementing immediate budget cuts across all non-essential departments. The K-9 Support Division is taking a significant hit. We are liquidating assets that do not provide tactical value." Knox felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "Assets, sir?" "The dogs," Harlan clarified. His voice sounded exceptionally tired. "Specifically, the ones on the medical or behavioral failure list. Valor is at the very top of that list." "I have been fostering him for weeks," Knox said. He kept his voice steady, but his hands curled into tight fists behind his back. "He is making real progress. He sleeps in the same room as me now. The noise sensitivity is decreasing. He just needs more time." Captain Prescott flipped a page in his folder. "Time is money, Knox, and this animal is a proven liability. He failed 3 simulation tests. He destroyed base property during a thunderstorm. The military cannot justify spending taxpayer dollars to feed and house a broken tool. The decision is final. We are transferring custody of the German Shepherd to the county animal control facility." Knox stared at Prescott in absolute disbelief. "Animal control will put him down. You know that. A military dog with bite history and severe anxiety will never get adopted. They will kill him within a week." "That is out of our hands," Prescott said coldly. Knox turned to Commander Harlan. "Sir, please give me another month. I will pay for his food out of my own pocket. I will take full responsibility for him." Harlan sighed heavily. He looked down at his polished desk. "It is not just about the budget, Knox. It is about you. The base psychiatrists submitted your latest evaluation yesterday. Your trauma symptoms have not improved enough for active duty. You are still designated as psychologically unfit. The command structure will not allow an unstable operator to handle a dangerous, unpredictable animal. It is a massive legal liability for the Navy." Knox felt the blood rush instantly to his face. They were using his own trauma against him. They viewed both him and the dog as defective equipment. "He is not unpredictable," Knox argued. His voice rose slightly in the quiet room. "He is scared. He served this country and the system broke him. You cannot just throw him away like garbage." "Watch your tone," Captain Prescott snapped immediately. "You are bordering on insubordination." Harlan held up a hand to stop Prescott. He looked Knox directly in the eye. "The transfer paperwork is already signed, Knox. You have exactly 2 days to return the dog to the base kennels. Baker will handle the transport to the county facility on Thursday morning. That is a direct order. Do you understand?" Knox stood entirely frozen. His jaw was clenched so tight his teeth physically ached. He wanted to scream. He wanted to flip the heavy wooden desk over, but his deep military training kept him rooted to the spot. "Do you understand the order, Knox?" Harlan repeated loudly. "Yes, sir." Knox forced the words out of his dry throat. "Dismissed." Knox walked out of the office building. The bright California sun blinded him. He felt entirely numb. He got into his truck and gripped the steering wheel. He drove away from the base without looking back. The drive down the coastal highway took some time. Usually looking at the ocean calmed his mind. Today, the blue water just looked cold and empty. The radio was off. The only sound was the constant hum of the truck tires on the asphalt. Knox gripped the steering wheel so hard, his hands started to cramp painfully. His mind raced through a dozen different scenarios. He thought about hiring a civilian lawyer to fight the military decision. He thought about calling the local news stations to create a public scandal. But he knew the bitter truth. The military legally owned the dog. Property laws were absolute. By the time any legal challenge made it to a courtroom, Valor would already be dead. Knox pulled his truck into the dirt driveway of his cabin. He turned off the engine and sat in the quiet cabin for several minutes. He took a deep breath and stepped out. He unlocked the front door and walked inside. The house was completely silent. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter. "Valor," Knox called out softly. He heard the familiar clicking of heavy claws on the wooden floor. Valor walked out of the bedroom. The large German shepherd looked at Knox. The dog's ears perked up happily. Valor walked over and bumped his wet nose against Knox's hand. It was a simple greeting, but it meant everything. It was a sign of total trust. Knox slowly sank to his knees. He looked directly into the dog's dark brown eyes. Valor tilted his head, confused by the sudden change in Knox's posture. The dog let out a soft whine and licked Knox's knuckles gently. Knox pulled a folded piece of paper from his uniform pocket. It was the official surrender notice Harlan had handed him before he left. The black ink looked like a death warrant. 2 days left. Knox looked at the piece of paper, then looked at the dog. Valor sat down patiently in front of him. The dog had fought so hard to overcome his fear. He had learned to trust a human again. He had pulled Knox out of the darkest moments of his own depression. And now, the reward for all that hard work was a lethal injection at a concrete county shelter. A sudden violent wave of anger crashed over Knox. It was not the blind panic of his trauma. It was a sharp, focused, and crystal-clear rage. The military wanted to throw them both away. They expected Knox to just fall in line and follow the rules. They expected him to be a good, obedient soldier and let his friend die alone. Knox crushed the surrender notice in his fist. He squeezed it until his knuckles turned entirely white. "I am not letting them take you," Knox whispered. His voice was hard as stone. Valor let out a small bark, sensing the sudden shift in the room's energy. Knox stood up. He walked over to the kitchen trash can and threw the crumpled piece of paper inside. The numbness was completely gone. The crippling weight of survivor's guilt had vanished entirely. In its place was a burning, undeniable sense of purpose. He had failed to protect his brothers in the desert. He would absolutely not fail to protect this dog. Knox walked into his bedroom and pulled a large canvas duffel bag from the closet. He threw it onto the bed. He unzipped it with a loud tearing sound. He started grabbing his heavy civilian clothes, his survival gear, and his emergency medical kit. He packed water purification tablets, high-calorie protein bars, and a compass. He moved with the speed and precision of a Navy SEAL preparing for a covert operation. He went into the kitchen and grabbed every bag of dry dog food he had. He loaded them into a separate waterproof sack. He grabbed Valor's heavy leash and a collapsible water bowl. He was no longer a broken man waiting for orders. He was a soldier planning a dangerous, unauthorized rescue mission. There was no turning back once he crossed this line. The consequences would be severe, but he truly did not care anymore. He looked back at the living room. Valor was watching him intently. "Pack light, buddy," Knox said. "We are leaving." Knox threw the heavy canvas duffel bag into the back of his truck. He tossed the waterproof sack of dog food right next to it. Valor jumped into the passenger seat without any hesitation. The German shepherd sat tall and watched Knox closely. Knox closed the tailgate and walked to the driver's side. He got in, started the engine, and put the truck in gear. They left the small coastal cabin behind. The drive started in total silence. Knox kept his eyes fixed firmly on the dark road ahead. He actively avoided the major highways. He knew the military police would monitor the main routes out of San Diego by morning. He took the winding back roads instead. He drove east, heading straight toward the rugged mountains of the Cleveland National Forest. The bright city lights slowly faded in his rearview mirror. The dense dark pine trees quickly replaced the concrete buildings. The air grew significantly colder as they climbed higher in elevation. Valor rested his heavy head on the center console. The dog watched the dark trees pass by the window. He did not show any signs of anxiety. The loud, unpredictable noises of the city were gone. The quiet, steady hum of the truck engine was the only sound. Knox reached over and rubbed the back of Valor's thick neck. The dog leaned heavily into the touch. They drove for several hours. Knox finally found a narrow, unpaved logging road. He turned the truck off the main path and drove deep into the thick forest. The road was rough and covered in deep mud from the recent storms. The truck bounced violently over large rocks and deep ruts. After a short while, the road ended completely at a small, hidden clearing. Knox parked the truck under a massive oak tree. He turned off the headlights. Complete darkness swallowed them immediately. He stepped out of the truck and breathed in the crisp, cold mountain air. Valor jumped out right behind him. The dog immediately put his nose to the ground and began investigating the new smells. Knox grabbed his tactical flashlight. He clicked it on and scanned the perimeter. The area was secure and completely isolated. He pulled his gear from the truck bed. He did not bother setting up a tent. He laid out a heavy waterproof tarp on the ground and threw his sleeping bag on top. He poured a large mound of dry kibble into Valor's metal bowl. The dog ate quickly and hungrily. Knox sat on the edge of the tarp. He pulled a protein bar from his pocket and chewed it slowly. He looked up at the night sky. The stars shone brightly without the city light pollution. For the first time in over a year, Knox's mind felt completely quiet. The suffocating weight of his trauma was absent. He knew he was committing a serious federal crime. He was officially absent without leave. He had stolen military property. The punishment would be incredibly severe. He faced a dishonorable discharge and years in a military prison. But sitting there in the dark forest with the dog, Knox felt absolute certainty. He made the right choice. Valor finished his food. The dog walked over and circled the sleeping bag twice before lying down. He pressed his back firmly against Knox's leg. Knox pulled a thick wool blanket over the dog. They slept under the open sky. The following morning arrived with a cold, biting wind. Knox woke up just before dawn. His internal military clock never failed. Valor was already awake. The dog sat at the edge of the clearing, watching the dark tree line intently. His ears swiveled back and forth, catching the subtle sounds of the waking forest. Knox stood up and stretched his stiff muscles. He rolled up his sleeping bag and packed his gear back into the truck. He needed to figure out a long-term plan. He needed to find a place where the military could never find them. A remote cabin in Montana, or a quiet farm in Idaho. He had enough savings to disappear for a few years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. He had turned it off during the drive. He needed to check the weather forecast to plan their route north. He held the power button down. The screen lit up brightly. The phone immediately vibrated violently in his hand. It did not stop. The screen displayed many missed calls. Many of them were from Sergeant Baker. Many were from the base security office. Several were from Commander Harlan. Knox also had many unread text messages. They all said the exact same thing. Return to base immediately. Before Knox could turn the phone back off, the screen flashed. An incoming call. Commander Harlan. Knox stared at the screen for a long moment. He took a deep breath, swiped the screen, and brought the phone to his ear. "Sir?" "Where are you, Knox?" Harlan demanded. His voice was cold and furious. It lacked any trace of its usual calm demeanor. "You did not report for morning muster. Baker went to your cabin. Your truck is gone. The dog is gone." "We left the area, sir," Knox said evenly. "You're making a massive mistake," Harlan warned him. "You're acting entirely out of emotion. You are currently a AWOL. The theft of a trained military working dog is a federal offense. Captain Prescott has already contacted the military police. They are tracking your cell phone signal right now. Warrants are being issued. You cannot outrun the United States Navy." "I'm not coming back, Commander," Knox replied. "And I'm not bringing Valor back to face a lethal injection. The system failed him. I will not fail him." "Listen to me very carefully, Knox," Harlan said. His voice dropped lower, sounding almost desperate. "You are throwing away your entire career. You will lose your pension. You will lose your rank. You will face a court-martial. You will go to Leavenworth Prison. Is this broken animal really worth destroying your entire life?" Knox looked across the clearing. Valor stood tall near the edge of the trees. The morning sun broke through the branches and hit the dog's dark coat. Valor turned his head and looked directly at Knox. The dog's eyes held no fear. They only held unwavering loyalty. "My life was already destroyed, sir," Knox said quietly. He brought it back. I accept the consequences of my actions. Knox, do not do this, Harlan pleaded one final time. Turn the truck around. Bring the dog to the base. I can try to talk to Prescott. I can try to lessen the charges. Do not send anyone looking for us, sir, Knox said. Goodbye. He pulled the phone away from his ear. He did not just hang up. He placed the phone on a large rock, picked up a heavy stone from the ground, and smashed the device into dozens of pieces. He crushed the internal tracking chip completely. He tossed the broken pieces into the thick bushes. He was entirely disconnected now. There was no going back. He whistled sharply. Valor ran over and jumped into the truck. Knox got behind the wheel and started the engine. He put the truck in gear and drove deeper into the mountains. The dirt road grew steeper and more treacherous as they continued upward. The tall pine trees formed a dense canopy overhead, blocking out most of the morning sunlight. The air became noticeably thinner. Knox navigated the sharp turns with expert precision. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. He kept checking his rearview mirror, fully expecting to see the flashing lights of military police vehicles behind him. But the road remained entirely empty. They drove for several hours before the road completely vanished into a wall of thick brush and fallen trees. Knox parked the truck and turned off the engine. This was as far as the vehicle could take them. They would have to proceed on foot if they wanted to truly disappear. He grabbed his heavy canvas backpack and strapped it on. He clipped a water canteen to his belt. He attached a long, sturdy tracking line to Valor's heavy-duty collar. "Let us move," Knox commanded quietly. They stepped into the dense forest. The terrain was incredibly rugged. Large boulders and steep ravines covered the landscape. Knox moved with the silent, efficient grace of a trained special operator. Valor matched his pace perfectly. The dog navigated the difficult terrain without any hesitation. The loud noises and the terrifying sirens of the naval base were miles away. Here in the wild, Valor was in his natural element. His senses were incredibly sharp and focused. They hiked for several hours without stopping. Knox's muscles burned, but his mind remained sharp and clear. He calculated their trajectory, aiming for a high ridge that would provide a clear vantage point of the surrounding valleys. He needed to establish a secure observation post to ensure no one was tracking them. As they climbed higher, the wind began to pick up violently. Dark, heavy clouds rolled over the mountain peaks very quickly. The temperature dropped sharply. Knox stopped and looked up at the sky. A severe storm was moving in incredibly fast. The weather in these mountains was notoriously unpredictable. Valor suddenly stopped walking. The dog lowered his head and sniffed the air aggressively. The fur on his back stood up slightly. He let out a low, warning growl. Knox immediately dropped to one knee. He unclipped the holster on his hip, keeping his hand close to his sidearm. He scanned the dense trees ahead. He trusted the dog's instincts completely. If Valor sensed danger, danger was absolutely present. The wind howled louder, shaking the tall pine trees around them. The storm was about to break, and deep in the wilderness, far away from any military pursuit, Knox and Valor were about to face a completely unexpected threat. The wind whipped violently through the tall pine trees. Knox tightened the straps on his backpack. He looked at the dark sky. The storm was moving in faster than he anticipated. Valor stood entirely still. The German shepherd kept his nose pointed toward the steep ridge above them. A low rumble echoed through the ground. It did not sound like thunder. It felt deep and structural. Knox knew the signs of unstable terrain. He spent years training in hostile environments. The heavy rain from the previous week had saturated the mountain soil completely. "Move!" Knox commanded sharply. He grabbed Valor's leash and sprinted toward a large outcropping of solid granite. They reached the rock just as the mountain gave way. The sound was deafening. It sounded like a freight train crashing through the forest. Tons of mud, rocks, and uprooted trees cascaded down the steep slope. The landslide tore through the path they had just walked on. It wiped out everything in its path. Knox pressed his back against the granite wall. He pulled Valor close to his chest to protect him from the flying debris. The ground shook violently under their feet. The destruction lasted for 2 terrifying minutes. Then an eerie silence settled over the mountain. Knox coughed, waving away the thick cloud of dust. He checked Valor. The dog was dirty, but unharmed. Knox stepped out from behind the rock. The landscape was completely unrecognizable. A massive scar of brown earth cut straight through the green forest. The dirt road below was entirely gone. They were completely cut off from the valley. Knox took a sip from his canteen. He needed to find higher ground to assess the damage. He started climbing the rocky edge of the slide zone. Valor followed closely behind him. As they reached a flat plateau, Valor stopped suddenly. The dog's ears perked up. He let out a sharp bark and pulled hard on the leash. Knox listened carefully. Underneath the sound of the howling wind, he heard a faint cry. It sounded like a child. Knox unclipped Valor's leash. "Find them!" he ordered. Valor darted forward. He scrambled over fallen logs and piles of wet mud. Knox ran after him. They crossed a small ridge and looked down into a shallow ravine. A terrifying scene unfolded below them. A yellow school bus sat half buried in the thick mud. It had clearly been pushed off a higher forest road by the landslide. Several children stood on the roof of the bus, crying hysterically. Near the back of the bus, a woman desperately dug into the mud with her bare hands. She was a young teacher. She had short blonde hair and wore a bright green rain jacket that was completely covered in dark brown dirt. Knox slid down the steep embankment. He reached the bus in seconds. "Are you hurt?" Knox asked loudly. The teacher jumped in surprise. She looked at Knox with wide, terrified eyes. "Please help us," she cried out. "I am Miss Thornton. We were on a nature field trip. The road just collapsed. Most of the kids got out, but Tyler and Mia are trapped under the back exit. The mud is too heavy." Knox immediately dropped his backpack. He waded into the thick mud next to Miss Thornton. The mud was like wet cement. It reached past his knees. He saw a small hand reaching out from a narrow gap under the twisted metal door. "I have you," Knox yelled to the trapped children. "Stay calm." He grabbed the heavy metal door. He planted his boots deep into the mud and pulled with all his strength. His muscles burned intensely. The door did not move an inch. The pressure from the wet earth was simply too great for one man to move. "We need heavy equipment," Knox told Thornton, "or at least a dozen men to dig them out before the mud sets." "Nobody knows we are down here," Thornton sobbed. "The radio broke during the crash. My phone has no signal." Knox looked at the sky. The storm clouds were breaking slightly. He knew military and civilian rescue teams would be scanning the area soon. The landslide was massive enough to trigger an immediate emergency response. Suddenly, a rhythmic thumping sound echoed off the mountain walls. Knox looked up. 2 large rescue helicopters appeared over the ridge. They were civilian search and rescue choppers painted bright orange and white. They flew low over the forest canopy. "Up here!" Thornton screamed. She waved her arms frantically, but the helicopters flew right past them. The ravine was deep, and the tall pine trees obscured the yellow bus from above. The pilots could not see them through the thick forest cover. The helicopters circled back. They dropped even lower. The deafening sound of their massive rotor blades filled the entire valley. The noise vibrated intensely in Knox's chest. Knox looked over at Valor. The German shepherd had collapsed to the ground. The overwhelming noise of the helicopters triggered the dog's deepest trauma. Valor pressed his belly flat against the wet earth, his ears pinned flat against his skull. He let out a high-pitched whine that was barely audible over the roaring engines. The dog shook violently from head to tail. The trauma of the base sirens and the thunderous storms flooded Valor's mind completely. The flight response took over. Valor scrambled backward. He slipped in the mud, trying desperately to find a way out. He looked toward the dark, dense forest edge. He was preparing to bolt into the wild, intending to run until the terrifying noise stopped. "Valor, no!" Knox shouted. But the dog did not hear him. The helicopters hovered directly overhead now, searching blindly. The noise was absolute torture for the animal. The trapped children continued to cry. The mud continued to settle tightly around the bus. Time was running out rapidly. Knox stood frozen in the wet mud. He had to save the children, but if he let Valor run into the wild, the traumatized dog would surely die out there alone. The mountain demanded an impossible choice. Valor scrambled backward. His paws slipped wildly in the thick, wet mud. He turned his body toward the dark tree line. The terrifying noise of the helicopters completely consumed his mind. He was utterly deaf to everything else around him. He just needed to run far away from the deafening sound. Knox did not hesitate. He lunged forward immediately. He threw his entire body weight into the mud. His arms wrapped tightly around Valor's thick waist, just as the dog leaped forward. They both crashed heavily into the wet earth. Valor thrashed violently. The large dog kicked and scratched, driven by pure blind panic. Knox held on tight. He pulled the heavy German Shepherd firmly against his chest. "No!" Knox shouted loudly over the roaring engines. "You stay with me!" Valor snapped his jaws blindly. The dog was completely lost in his severe trauma. The helicopter rotors beat the air above them, sending powerful waves of downward wind. The noise was absolutely deafening. It felt like a heavy physical weight pressing down on them. Knox shifted his tight grip. He pushed Valor down into the deep mud, forcing the dog to lie flat. Knox threw his right leg over Valor's back, pinning the strong animal to the ground without hurting him. He reached quickly for his heavy waterproof jacket. He unzipped it and pulled it off his shoulders. Knox threw the thick jacket completely over Valor's head. He wrapped the dark fabric tightly around the dog's ears, trying desperately to block out the overwhelming noise. Knox leaned down until his mouth was right next to Valor's covered ear. "Focus on me," Knox commanded sharply. He pressed his hands firmly against the sides of the dog's chest. He used the exact same grounding technique from the night of the fierce storm. Deep inhale, slow exhale. "I am right here. I have you. Do not run." The civilian helicopter circled directly above the steep ravine. The pilots finally spotted the yellow school bus buried below. The massive flying machines hovered loudly. The severe downwash blew dirt and dirty water everywhere. Under the heavy jacket, Valor continued to shake uncontrollably. But Knox did not let go. He kept his steady, firm pressure. He forced his own racing heartbeat to slow down. He completely ignored the noisy helicopters. He ignored the cold mud soaking through his uniform clothes. He only focused on the terrified dog. "We have a job to do," Knox said loudly into the heavy jacket. "Those kids need us right now. I need you. You are a soldier. Stand by me." Slowly, the violent thrashing stopped. Valor's erratic breathing began to synchronize with Knox's steady chest. The dog stopped pulling toward the dense forest. The blind panic started to fade away. The intensive training the military had drilled into Valor began to break through the massive wall of fear. Knox felt the sudden shift in the dog's tense muscles. Valor was no longer trying to escape. He was actively waiting for a command. Knox carefully pulled the wet jacket off Valor's head. The German Shepherd kept his head low, but his dark eyes were crystal clear. He looked directly at Knox. The helicopters still roared violently overhead, but Valor did not flinch at all. He stayed perfectly still in the mud. "Good boy," Knox said proudly. He pointed his finger toward the back of the half-buried school bus. "Search! Find them!" Valor stood up instantly. He shook the thick mud from his dark coat. He turned his head toward the metal bus. He let out a loud, powerful bark. The dog completely ignored the deafening noise coming from the sky. He bounded forward, charging straight into the deepest part of the unstable mudslide. Valor reached the blocked back exit of the bus. Ms. Thornton was still crying loudly, her bare hands bleeding heavily from digging at the sharp rocks. Valor pushed right past her. The dog lowered his wet nose to the tiny gap beneath the twisted metal door. He took a very deep breath. He caught the human scent immediately. Valor started digging instantly. His large front paws moved with incredible speed and raw power. He threw huge chunks of wet earth and heavy rocks backward. His sharp claws tore through the packed mud effortlessly. The dog dug with a frantic, desperate energy. He knew exactly what was buried underneath the dirt. Knox arrived seconds later. He dropped to his knees right next to Valor. "Help him," Knox told the shocked teacher. The three of them dug together. Valor did the hard work of 10 grown men. The dog bit onto large tree roots and pulled them completely out of the way. He ignored the sharp stones cutting deeply into his footpads. He focused entirely on the faint scent of the trapped children. The small gap under the heavy door grew wider. Knox wedged his hands into the narrow opening. He braced his heavy boots firmly against the side of the bus. He pulled up with every single ounce of strength he had left in his body. The thick metal groaned loudly and bent outward. Valor squeezed his head into the opening. He grabbed the wet sleeve of a small jacket tightly with his teeth. The dog planted his back feet firmly in the mud and pulled backward. He dragged a young boy covered entirely in mud out into the open air. Miss Thornton immediately grabbed the crying boy and hugged him incredibly tight. "One more!" she yelled over the engine noise. "Mia is still inside." Valor did not need to be told twice. The dog dove right back into the narrow, dark hole. The wet mud was actively collapsing around the edges. It was an incredibly dangerous situation. But Valor did not hesitate for a second. He squeezed his large muscular body through the tight space. Knox held the heavy metal door up, his tired muscles trembling severely under the immense weight. "Hurry!" He gritted his teeth. Inside the dark hole, Valor found the second child quickly. The little girl was stuck firmly beneath a heavy seat cushion. Valor grabbed the thick fabric of her shirt collar. He pulled firmly, but very gently. He guided the terrified girl through the wet darkness safely. A moment later, Valor emerged from the hole. He dragged the little girl completely out of the treacherous mud. Knox instantly let go of the heavy metal door. It slammed shut immediately with a loud thud. He scooped the little girl up and carried her quickly to the safe, dry ground away from the bus. A rescue basket lowered slowly from the helicopter above. Men in bright orange suits rappelled down thick ropes into the ravine. The cavalry had finally arrived. Knox sat down heavily on a large flat rock. His chest heaved rapidly as he caught his breath. His hands were covered entirely in deep cuts and thick mud. Valor walked over very slowly. The German shepherd looked absolutely exhausted. His paws were bleeding freely. His thick coat was completely matted with dirt. But he walked proudly with his head held high. The dog stopped right in front of Knox and sat down patiently. Knox looked up at the roaring helicopters. Then he looked at the brave dog. Valor did not care about the terrifying noise anymore. He had completely conquered his deepest fear. Knox smiled widely. He reached out and pulled Valor into a tight, warm hug. The rescue basket descended rapidly from the loud helicopter. Paramedics reached out and grabbed the two children first. They pulled Tyler and Mia into the aircraft safely. Ms. Thornton went next. She cried heavily and thanked Knox repeatedly before her feet left the ground. Finally, a heavy metal harness dropped down for Knox and Valor. Knox secured the thick nylon straps tightly around the dog's wide chest. He clipped himself in securely. The electric winch pulled them up into the noisy helicopter cabin. Valor stayed perfectly calm. The dog pressed his head firmly against Knox's leg and watched the muddy ground fall away. The loud engine noise did not bother him at all. Now he had faced his absolute worst nightmare, and won. The helicopter landed on the flat roof of a large civilian hospital in San Diego. Medical staff rushed out immediately to take the children and the exhausted teacher. Knox unclipped his harness and stepped onto the solid concrete roof. He led Valor out of the aircraft. A tall man in a dark suit approached them quickly. He was Agent Thornton, a strict federal investigator. Thornton had short gray hair and a very serious expression on his face. "Knox," Thornton said loudly over the slowing rotors, "I am placing you under military arrest. You will come with me right now." Knox nodded slowly. He expected this completely. "I understand, but the dog stays with me." Thornton looked down at the mud-covered German shepherd. "The dog comes too." They walked downstairs in silence. The hospital lobby was completely chaotic. News reporters and television camera crews crowded the main entrance. The massive landslide had made national news quickly. Someone had already leaked the incredible story of the heroic rescue. A local reporter, a young woman with a microphone and a bright red blazer named Lauren, pushed aggressively through the dense crowd. "Are you the Navy SEAL who saved the trapped students?" Lauren asked quickly. Her cameraman pointed his large lens directly at Knox and Valor. "Is this the military dog that dug them out of the mud?" Knox completely ignored the microphones. He kept his head down and walked straight ahead. Agent Thornton pushed the eager reporters back forcefully and escorted Knox into a waiting black SUV. Valor jumped into the back seat without hesitation. The heavy vehicle drove quickly away from the flashing cameras. An hour later, Knox sat in Commander Harlan's office. He was still covered entirely in dried mud. His muscles ached deeply from the physical exertion. Valor sat quietly by his dirty boots. Captain Prescott sat in the corner chair. He looked incredibly uncomfortable and tense. Commander Harlan sat behind his polished desk. He held a digital tablet in his hands. Harlan placed the tablet gently on the desk. "The news is everywhere. Every major television network is running the story right now. They are calling you and the dog national heroes." Knox looked straight at Harlan. "I went AWOL. I stole military property. I know the severe charges against me, sir." Captain Prescott cleared his throat loudly. "The theft of a working dog is a serious federal crime. The media attention does not change the law at all." Harlan held up his hand quickly. "Stop talking, Prescott. The military is not going to court-martial a man who just saved 3 civilians from a deadly mudslide. And we are certainly not going to put down the brave dog that dug them out. The public relations disaster would be absolute." Prescott looked very angry, but he stayed completely silent. Harlan turned his attention back to Knox. "The rescue team found your truck. They saw the destroyed road. They know you could not turn back even if you wanted to. We are officially reclassifying your absence as an emergency medical leave. The destruction of your phone will be marked as accidental damage during the rescue operation. All formal charges are officially dropped." Knox felt a massive weight lift off his chest instantly. He looked down at Valor. The large dog wagged his tail once. "What about Valor?" Knox asked carefully. Harlan opened his top desk drawer. He pulled out a fresh stack of printed papers. He placed them neatly in front of Knox. "This is a permanent adoption form. The military is officially retiring Valor from active service with full honors. He is no longer government property. He is yours." Knox stared at the white papers. He felt a sudden thick tightness in his throat. He picked up the black pen and signed his name firmly on the bottom line. He pushed the papers back across the wooden desk. "There is one more thing," Harlan said softly. "Your medical evaluation. You proved today that you can operate flawlessly under extreme pressure, but you also proved that you have a unique talent for handling traumatized animals. We need that specific skill. We are offering you a completely new position. You will be the lead civilian instructor for the K9 rehabilitation program. You will take the dogs that fail the standard tests and help them recover. You will save them." Knox felt a profound sense of purpose fill his mind. He did not have to return to the desert. He did not have to fight in another violent war. He could stay right here and heal the broken ones. "I accept the position, sir," Knox said firmly. Harlan smiled warmly for the first time. "Good. Go home, Knox. Get some real rest." Knox walked out of the naval base proudly. The late afternoon sun hung low in the clear sky. He drove his truck back to the small coastal cabin. He took a long hot shower and washed the heavy mountain mud away. He fed Valor a large bowl of fresh meat. The following morning, Knox woke up early. He did not wake up gasping for air. There were no terrifying nightmares. He felt completely rested and peaceful. He put on a clean t-shirt and light shorts. He grabbed a bright yellow tennis ball from the kitchen counter. "Let us go," Knox called out happily. Valor bounded out of the bedroom with incredible energy. They walked out the front door and headed straight for the beautiful beach. The golden sand stretched out for miles. The blue ocean waves crashed gently against the long shore. The salty breeze felt incredibly refreshing on his face. Knox walked right down to the wet water's edge. He took a very deep breath. He let the clean air fill his lungs entirely. The dark shadows of his past were finally gone. The heavy guilt was washed away forever. He looked at the massive German shepherd standing right next to him. Valor looked back with bright, happy eyes. Knox pulled his arm back and threw the yellow tennis ball far down the sunny beach. Valor sprinted after it with explosive speed. The strong dog kicked up wet sand as he ran. The ocean water splashed playfully around his heavy paws. He caught the ball perfectly and ran happily back to Knox. He dropped the ball and barked joyfully. Knox smiled broadly. He watched his best friend run freely under the beautiful open sky. They had saved each other in the terrifying dark. Now they were going to live peacefully in the bright light. The story of Knox and Valor shows us that sometimes the very things society labels as broken are the ones capable of the greatest miracles. Both of them were cast aside and judged by their scars and their trauma. But through patience, understanding, and unconditional love, they found strength in each other. From my perspective, this story is a powerful reminder that no one is truly beyond saving. Sometimes giving another soul a second chance is exactly what we need to heal ourselves. If this story of resilience and redemption touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder of hope today. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, healing, and the courage to face any storm. Please comment Amen if you believe in the power of second chances.